Today we're going to do, first of all, we're going to finish talking about the Roman Revolution. Now, when we ended last time, we ended talking about how Sulla in 888 BC, remember there was a crisis, war had broken out in the east. Mithridates of Pontus had declared war on Rome, and when they tried to, when the Roman plebeian assembly under the tribunes tried to replace Sulla, the Optimate general, with Marius, Sulla already had an army under his command, and he was already preparing to leave and fight against Mithridates. But when he heard that he was being replaced, he didn't want Populare, the other political party, to win out. So he appealed to his soldiers, and he convinced them to break the law, basically, to go against the Constitution and to march on Rome. And he promised them land in exchange for their loyalty to him. So these soldiers were willing to be more loyal to a general than they were to the law, to the political system, to the Constitution of the traditional Constitution of Rome. And they marched on Rome, and Sulla eliminated his opposition. Either his political opponents went into hiding or they were murdered. He put up huge lists that were called proscriptions. And he put bounties on all the enemies, and if you could get paid cash if you killed these people on these lists of proscriptions. And once he had felt like he had either killed off his enemies or put them into hiding, he took his army and marched on Mithridates. Now, many people see this march on Rome as the beginning of the end for the Roman Republic, because you have a situation where the army of soldiers, a lot of them were proletariat who were poor and hoped to gain from following a successful general. These soldiers were more willing to be loyal to a man, loyal to a general who promised them land or plunder or whatever they wanted. They're more willing to be loyal to a general than to serve the people, to serve the nation, to serve the republic. And that was really the beginning of Rome's descent into a military dictatorship.
But when you review what all Rome was doing and going through, you can understand why the soldiers were willing to do that.
That's right, because they remember, if you remember the story with Marius, when Marius tried to get land for his men for their loyal service to Rome, the senators blocked it, and in fact they murdered Marius' supporters. They killed him. So the soldiers had good reasons to distrust the Roman Senate and to distrust the Roman government, because there was a history there of the Roman government not fulfilling its promises. Well, anyway, so today what we're going to do is we're going to finish how Rome became a military dictatorship, especially under one of the great generals in history, Julius Caesar. But it would be Julius Caesar's adopted son and grandnephew, Octavian, better known to history as Augustus Caesar, who would finally bring return stability to Rome. And he would still remain as a military dictatorship, but he created a system of government where there was an appearance of a constitutional order, where you had a military dictatorship, but the power of the dictator was legitimized basically by the old institutions of the republic. And this system of government that Augustus created is known as the Principate. And Augustus was pretty much the architect of this system, and he created a system that would give Rome and its empire stability and order for 2 centuries. And it would be this period of the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, that would see the growth of Christianity, which would be important in later centuries. Now, this Principate that was created by Augustus, though, had its own set of flaws, as we'll see. And eventually, the legitimacy of the Republic kind of wore off. By the time you get to the 3rd century AD, like the 200th AD, the 3rd century, you had a situation where, because of all these ongoing civil wars between rival generals for power, that the whole veneer of the Roman Republic kind of dissolved. And so what was needed was a new way of legitimizing a military dictator. See, military dictators never have legitimacy because they rule by force alone. I mean, the only thing that they hold their power is fear and might. And you can't build stable system of government based completely on fear and might. You have to have some kind of ideology that unites people and brings them together. That's why Augustus created the Principate. That's why he created this system where the old ways of the Roman constitution legitimized his military dictatorship. But by the time you get to the 3rd century AD, that was no longer the case. The republic had been gone for centuries, and people had forgotten it. And so, by the time you get to by the end of the 3rd century, early 4th century, emperors came up with the idea. They began saying, "My power comes because I am a god. You need to respect me because my power comes from the gods above. So if you rebel against me, you're not just rebelling against a man, you're rebelling against God himself." And they begin to call themselves no longer the princeps, but the dominus, which means Lord. So now you have to refer to the emperor as his lordship, not just El Presidente or princeps like in the old Roman Republic, but now he was the Lord and God. And they created a new sense of legitimacy, and that created that sense that the emperor was more than human. That was something that gave a certain amount of legitimacy to the empire in the years that followed. So hopefully, by the end of the day today, we'll talk about the end of the Roman Revolution, the establishment of the Principate by Augustus Caesar, the growth of Christianity, and then talk about the 3rd century crisis, these civil wars that resulted in the replacement of the Principate by the Dominate by the time you get to the end of the 3rd and early 4th century AD. All right. So if we don't get that today, we'll get that definitely. Cover all that by Wednesday. All right. So let's finish up the Roman Revolution. Now, when Sulla here's a picture of Sulla here. When he went off to fight Mithridates, here's Mithridates' portrait. What happened was that Marius had gone into hiding. And as soon as Sulla's armies were gone, had left to fight against Mithridates, Marius called upon his old veterans, his old troops that were still around. They were pretty up there in age, but he called upon his old veterans, and they formed an army, and they marched on Rome. Now, when Marius got to Rome, he ordered the execution of Sulla's supporters, as many as he could find. Many of them went into hiding. So you had another bloodbath. And then when it was all said and done, Marius, who was already pushing 80 at this time, Marius died. He got elected consul for the 7th time. He kind of rigged the vote, but he got elected consul, and then in 86, excuse me, he died. He actually died of old age, even though he had instituted this massive bloodbath. Well, Mithridates, when he found out what was going on in Rome, he was busy fighting, not Mithridates, Sulla was over fighting Mithridates over in what is today Greece and Turkey, over in the east. And when he heard about what was going on in Rome, that Marius' supporters, the old party, the Populares, had seized Rome, as soon as he could, he made peace with Mithridates. He kind of calmed things down with Mithridates, came to terms with him, and then rushed his army back to Italy. And in 82 BC, he finally defeated the Populares. And he, once again, with the support of the loyal army, was dictator of Rome. And once again, he ordered executions. So again, the bloodbath continued. This time, the more Populares were killed, and many of them who weren't killed went into hiding. Now Sulla was back on top. Now, he was an optimate. He was very conservative. He believed in the old republic and the leadership of the senatorial elite. He came from a very distinguished old blue blood family. And so, before he died in 79 BC, he laid down being dictator and restored the republic. And he said, well, I've killed all my enemies, so I'm safe now. In fact, people called him Sulla the Fortunate, Sulla Felix, because it was claimed that he had murdered anybody who could kill him. and he had rewarded all of his friends. So when he retired. He went into retirement in 79 BC. He thought that he had saved the republic by murdering as many populares as he could find. And that's what he thought, anyway. And then he retired, and then he caught this terrible disease and died where maggots ate his flesh. So it was kind of a joke in Rome that he was Sulla the Fortunate, that he had died, he had retired, and thought he had killed all of his enemies, and then he dies of this horrible disease where maggots were eating his flesh while he was still living. So anyway, so there is justice in the world. But anyway, but you see, the problem with Sulla was that, you see, all these Roman politicians were thinking, hey, if Sulla became the master of Rome, everybody was singing Sulla's praises. He had restored the republic, he had become the master of Rome, he had all this loyal army to support him, and a lot of Roman generals and Roman aristocrats were thinking, hey, I want to be like Sulla. If I want to save Rome, I want to be the dictator of Rome, just like Sulla. Sulla did it, I can do it too. Now, what happened is that in the years after Sulla's death, after he had retired, was that there were a whole new generation of Roman politicians who wanted to be like Sulla. And there were three of them that arose as being the most powerful and influential in Rome. One of them was Crassus. Crassus was came from a senatorial family, very elite family, but he became one of the wealthiest men in Rome. He invested in real estate. He was a slumlord, basically. He made his money off of real estate. He was a pretty smart guy. He organized the first fire department in Roman history, maybe in world history. And when that's how he became a real estate magnate. When there was a fire in Rome, he would bring up his firemen. He'd say, well, I'll buy you that land off you. And he says, well, it's on fire. Well, I'll put it out if you sell it to me. Talk about fire sale. And he made a fortune. He became the biggest landowner in all of Rome because he had all these properties in the city of Rome. Very wealthy man. And but he had a lot of support from equestrians. There were a lot of wealthy Romans who liked Crassus. Now, another powerful politician was Pompey. Pompey, you see here's a picture of Pompey here in the lower right here. Pompey made his name as a great general at first. He and leader of the armies. He led an army. He was the guy who finally defeated Mithridates and forced Mithridates off the throne. And he was the guy who annexed Syria to the Roman Empire. He wasn't a very good at public relations, though. When he conquered Jerusalem, he decided that he was going to enter the Holy of Holies, which you're only supposed to be a priest. Only the high priest can enter the Holy of Holies in the Temple of Jerusalem. And he decided that since he was the victorious general of Rome, that he was going to enter. And so he just went in there and forced his way in and walked in. One of the stories was that there was this rumor went around that the Jews worshiped the idol of a giant donkey. And it was believed that once a year on Yom Kippur, the Jewish priest went and kissed a donkey's ass. That's what they thought. I mean, that was one part of the anti-Semitic. I mean, anti-Semitism has been around a long time, even before Christianity, before anything. That's what they thought. So Pompey, he thought it was a big joke. So he said, I'm just going to go in there and see. When he got there, there was nothing in there except for the ark. I think the ark wasn't even there at this point. It had disappeared. There's nothing in there. And he went, whatever. But he really set back relations between Jews and Romans, because here's a pagan, heathen, Gentile going in and violating the Temple of Jerusalem. So he did set back Jewish-Roman relations forever by this impious act. But anyway, so Pompey made a name for himself as this great general. And so he was one of the big politicians along with Crassus. Now, another big aspiring politician, and the youngest of the three, was Julius Caesar. You can see his picture here in the upper right. Now, Julius Caesar, the only thing Julius Caesar had going for him when he was a young man was that he was Marius's nephew. I mean, by his aunt, not by blood, but by marriage. So his aunt Julia had been married to Marius. So the only thing that Julius Caesar initially had going for him was that he was the great hope of the populares. A lot of the populares had been murdered and been put to death. Julius Caesar had been too young. He'd just been a kid at the time of the proscription, so he had survived the proscriptions. And a lot of the old populares, they looked at Julius Caesar as the new generation. So he initially, that was his only support of political support. Now, these three men, because of their aspirations and their ambitions, the old Roman order, the Optimates, the old Roman senators, they hated these three guys. They distrusted them because they knew that all three of them were very ambitious and aspired to become dictators of Rome. So the senators who made up the Optimate party in the Roman Senate, they decided that they were going to do everything they could to embarrass these three guys and to keep them from getting control and power. So what did these three guys decide to do? They decided, hey, even though we can't stand each other, well, we're all equally ambitious, let's form an alliance. So these three guys came together only because they had a common set of enemies. The old Optimate Roman senators, the old guard in the Roman Senate. So these three guys came together and they formed the first triumvirate in 60 BC. And they basically, between the three of them, triumvirate means three men. That's what all it means. These three men, between the three of them, they had enough political support that they pretty much could run Rome. So the first triumvirate, basically, they were running Rome, these three guys working together against the old Roman Optimates, the old guard, the Roman conservatives. Now these three guys, though, the problem was that they really didn't like each other, didn't trust each other. They only were coming together because they had a common set of enemies. Now, in the years that followed, though, what happened is that Julius Caesar made a name for himself. Julius Caesar, after 60 BC, he decided to wage war against the Gauls. The Gauls were the Gauls lived in what is today France, and France and Belgium, that area, and they were the traditional enemies of Rome. They had been enemies of Rome for as long as Romans could remember. Back in when the Gauls had sacked Rome in the 4th century BC. So the Gauls were an ancient enemy of Rome, and Julius Caesar took the fight to the Gauls. In fact, he conquered Gaul. He conquered the Gauls. He conquered what is today France and made it part of the Roman Empire. And this made him a great hero among the Romans, because here was a guy who was defeating Rome's ancient enemy and winning battle after battle and sending all this plunder and gold back to Rome. So Julius Caesar was really making a name for himself. Well, Crassus decided, hey, I can't compete against that. If I'm going to be as popular as Julius Caesar, I need to go out and win some battles of my own. Now, there was another enemy of Rome, not quite so ancient, but an enemy of Rome that lived in what is today Iran and southern Mesopotamia. They were the rising power in the east, the Parthians, and we'll talk about them later. But the Parthians were Iranian people who had built an empire that stretched all the way to India, and they were seen as a growing threat to the east of Rome. So Crassus decided, hey, I'm going to make a name for myself for going to battle against the Parthians. And I got a sad face with it. It didn't end well for Crassus. Crassus went to war against the Parthians. He was defeated, and his army was destroyed. And that left the Rome's eastern frontier open to attack. So it ended in disaster for Crassus, and he died. So that, instead of having a triumvirate, now you had a duumvirate. You had two guys, Pompey and Julius Caesar. Now, Pompey was thinking, this guy Julius Caesar is getting way too popular, and he was a little scared. So what Pompey decided to do was to throw in his lot with the old guard. So Pompey, he made up with his old enemies, and he became friends with the old guard of the old Roman Optimates, the Roman senators, and he made friends with them. And in 49 BC, they declared Julius Caesar an enemy of the Roman state, and they demanded that he disband his army and come to Rome to face trial. So basically, now you had the Roman Senate allied with Pompey, telling Julius Caesar, you're done, dismiss your armies, come back here, we're going to throw you under trial. Now, Julius Caesar knew that if he disbanded his army and went to Rome, he was a dead man, right? So what he decided to do was he appealed to his soldiers. He went to his soldiers and said, look, we fought many a battle together. You know that I'm going to get you land, I'm going to get you plunder. You follow me and I'll take you where you need to go. So let's all together march on Rome and take care of business. And the army said, just like they had followed Sulla in 88 BC, now the Roman army followed Julius Caesar, and they crossed into Italy. They crossed the Rubicon River, and so when he crossed the Rubicon River, that's when he said, "The die is cast." You know, when he crossed the Rubicon. You ever heard that phrase, "crossing the Rubicon"? You can use it at a party or when you want to impress people with your vast intelligence. Whenever you cross the Rubicon, it means that you've kind of burned your bridges. You've said, "To hell with this! I'm doing it. I'm going forward. I don't care what happens. I'm doing it." So that's what crossing the Rubicon means, or saying the die is cast. But anyway, he crossed the Rubicon into Italy, marched on Rome, and Pompey left because this huge army that had been so successful against the Gauls was now in Italy. So now Julius Caesar was in charge of Rome, but Pompey had fled to Greece, and so Julius Caesar followed him. And at the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BC, it was fought in what is today northern Greece. At this battle, the forces of Julius Caesar waged war against Pompey and his senatorial allies. And at this big battle, Pompey was defeated, and Julius Caesar was victorious. And after 48 BC, it was just a matter of mopping up his enemies. And now Julius Caesar was master of the world. He defeated all of his enemies. Pompey ended up getting killed by the Pharaoh of Egypt, treacherously, of course. And but now Julius Caesar was in charge of everything. And now Julius Caesar didn't know what to do with it, and so he decided. Eventually, he was elected dictator for life by the Senate. The Senate made him dictator for life, and now the senators. A lot of these senators didn't like him. A lot of these senators were optimates, but Julius Caesar was trying to reach out to these people. He was trying to reach out to them, trying to accommodate them, trying to end all the years of bloodletting and killing, and trying to establish some kind of peaceful order. So he was reaching out to all these former enemies and trying to be friends with them. And they rewarded him by murdering him, because they saw him as a tyrant. They saw him as a dictator, as a tyrant who was trying to overthrow the ancient republic. So in 44 BC, a group of senators, led by Brutus and Cassius, these were two men who Julius Caesar had actually tried to befriend and had raised to high positions in the Senate. These two men betrayed Julius Caesar, and they led a group of assassins. And these senators, assassins, they butchered Julius Caesar on the Ides of March, 44 BC. So Caesar was executed. And Brutus and Cassius and the other senators, when they committed this act, they thought they were liberating Rome from the tyrant and restoring the republic. That was what they hoped to do. But the problem is that these senators didn't have any broad public support. Many Romans had grown very cynical and believed that the republic was dead. Many Roman citizens didn't like these senators, saw them as a bunch of blue blood weaklings who didn't know how to run anything. And so these guys thought that they were liberating Rome, but they were mistaken. Now, what happened, though, instead was that you had a situation where Julius Caesar had lots of supporters. Remember, Julius Caesar had a loyal army that was behind him. And what happened is that the supporters of Julius Caesar and his soldiers formed a new alliance. Question?
You know the story of the soothsayer saying, "Beware the Ides of March"?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But there's a story. I mean, it's in a historian named Plutarch wrote a biography of Julius Caesar, and where soothsayer, there were all these warnings to Julius Caesar, all these omens that he ignored because he was an atheist, and that was part of the joke. That was one of the people pointed out that his Epicurean atheist beliefs. He ignored all these omens the gods were sending them, and his death was imminent, and then he ends up getting
that
killed.
didn't actually happen as kind of a representation of...
Yeah, in Shakespeare, if you ever read Julius Caesar's Shakespeare, which is based on Plutarch. Yeah. Now what happened was that the supporters of Julius Caesar and his soldiers, they got together and they formed a new alliance. Now the three men that came together to oppose the senators who had assassinated Julius Caesar, these men formed what became known as the Second Triumvirate in 43 BC. Now they included two of Julius Caesar's right-hand men, Mark Antony and a man by the name of Lepidus. Now, a third person involved was only 18 years of age at the time, and his name was Octavian. He was actually the only thing he had was that he wasn't the only, it was a big thing. He was the adopted son of Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar did not have a son. He had a daughter, but she had no children. So he had adopted, before his death, Julius Caesar had adopted as his son his great nephew, Octavian. And Octavian, the only thing Octavian had going for him originally, being just a young man, was that he was the heir of Caesar. Now what happened was that gave him a lot of power, because many of Julius Caesar's soldiers, these are the men who had fought and died, they were dead, so they weren't loyal to him, but men who had fought under Julius Caesar, they had great loyalty to him. Julius Caesar had the ability to inspire men to fight for him. They just loved this guy to death. They just loved him. And so that loyalty was transferred to his adopted son. So of the three men, Octavian Caesar had the edge because he had the loyalty of the vast majority of Caesar's troops. Now, these three men formed the Second Triumvirate, and their first order of business was to defeat the assassins of Julius Caesar, the old Optimate party, and to wipe them out. And in 42 BC, at the Battle of Philippi, which was fought in what is today northern Greece, the Brutus and Cassius and the Optimates were crushed. And the victorious general in this battle was mainly Mark Antony. And so the Optimates were defeated, and many of the Optimates were hunted down and murdered. And so many of the old guard were wiped out, or went into hiding, or surrendered themselves. So after Philippi, the three men, the triumvirate, were now running Rome. But these three men had no love for each other. They only came together for political reasons, because they had a common set of enemies in the assassins of Julius Caesar. So they had nothing really, low loyalty to one another. And it wasn't long before these three men were fighting each other. Now, in the end, Lepidus he ended up surrendering to Octavian Caesar, mainly because Octavian Caesar had the support of the army. So the veterans of Julius Caesar were very loyal to Octavian Caesar as the adopted son and heir of Julius Caesar. So that hurt Lepidus. Now, Antony realized this, so what Antony did was that he formed an alliance with the last independent ruler of Egypt, Cleopatra. Now, Cleopatra had been the lover of Julius Caesar, and now she became the lover and wife of Mark Antony. And the way that Mark Antony saw it was that he could use her wealth to buy mercenaries. He didn't have the support of a loyal army like Octavian did, but with the help of Cleopatra and her money, he could use that money to buy an army and buy loyalty. So these two guys went to war against each other. Antony with the support of Egypt, and Octavian with the support of primarily the army, the loyal veterans of Julius Caesar. Now, at the Battle of Actium, again, another battle fought. It was a naval battle fought off the coast of northern Greece. At the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, Cleopatra and Antony's troops were defeated. And basically, after this defeat, Antony was deserted by his mercenaries, and he ended up committing suicide. Supposedly, he died in the arms of Cleopatra, and then she took poison, and they both died in each other's arms. There's a famous play by Julius Caesar about, not by Julius Caesar, probably something by Shakespeare but it's based on ancient accounts. But anyway, so Mark Antony and Cleopatra, they're gone. And what happens next was that Octavian Caesar, he took over Egypt. And he was a pretty smart guy. When he took over Egypt after Cleopatra had committed suicide, he declared himself Pharaoh of Egypt. And he said, Egypt now, I conquered Egypt with my own army, with my own money, so Egypt is mine. And so all the vast wealth of Egypt now belonged to Octavian Caesar. And he would use that money and use that wealth that he had achieved to build a new regime in Rome. Now, when Octavian got back to Rome, he was now a military dictator. Now he realized that if he didn't take the steps, he was going to have the same fate as his uncle, because being dictator was not acceptable. Romans were very traditional. So what Octavian was able to do was to create a system that would kind of give legitimacy to his military dictatorship, to kind of clothe his military dictatorship in the forms and the traditions of the old Roman Republic, so that his power would be more acceptable. Now, first thing he did was that he made sure that he went to all the old families, the old Republican families, and he bought them out. He had lots of money. He was the richest man in Rome. And he went to these old families and said, look, I know you need some cash. I'm here for you. Think of me as a bank. Whatever you need, I'll cover you. So he built up a strong support in the Senate. And then in 27 BC, and probably in something that was rehearsed, he went before the Roman Senate and said, I'm going to abdicate. I'm going to lay down my power as military dictator, and I'm restoring the republic. I'm restoring the republic. And everybody's like, oh, what a great man. Oh, he's restoring the republic. And what they did was that they made him commander of all of Rome's armies. They said, look, you are such a great man, we can't allow you to retire. We want to make you commander of all of Rome's armies. And they gave him the title of proconsul. Now, a proconsul traditionally was a Roman governor, but they made him governor simultaneously of every frontier province in the Roman Empire. So that meant that all the armies were now under his command. And that would be one of the key powers of every Roman emperor. As proconsul and governor of all the armies, they commanded the armies with the blessing of the Roman Senate. So now the Senate was blessing him as the Roman general. Now, from this point on, another thing they did at this point was that the senators all hailed him as this great man, and they said, you are the leader of the Senate. You are the princeps senatus. That's where we get the term principe. You are the leader of the Senate. So at once, now he was the leader of the Senate, and everybody was praising him to the skies. And from that point onward, the title imperator. Now, imperator had traditionally been given to any Roman general who led Roman armies to victory. But from this point onward, the title imperator was reserved for one man, the guy who commanded all the armies, the emperor. We get the word emperor from imperator. So now the title imperator became a title held by just one person. And now Octavian and his armies were very successful. They kind of, during his reign, not so much Octavian, but his generals were able to stabilize the situation in Gaul, conquer armies, conquer peoples in the Balkans. He established stable Roman frontiers along the Danube River and the Rhine River. So he did restore order to Rome's frontier provinces. He stabilized the situation with Parthia. So you have to give the guy credit for kind of giving stability to Rome's frontiers, and so he did have success there. So that was one of the things he did. Now, another thing that happened to Octavian Caesar was at this point, because of his services to Rome, the Roman Senate gave him the title Augustus. Now, this was significant because Augustus was not a title that had been given to men before. It was usually reserved for gods. So now the Roman Senate was saying, hey, now Octavian, you're no longer Octavian Caesar. You're Augustus, God. They made him a god, basically. Now, and people started building temples to him all over Rome, all over the empire. They began building temples. And you would honor the daimon, or the deus, the spirit of the emperor. People began offering prayers and building. They would offer incense to the statues of Augustus, and he was everywhere across the empire. Everybody worshipped him as a god. He was Augustus Caesar, God. Now, so that also gave a certain kind of legitimacy to him. Now, another thing that happened was that, you see, he commanded the armies, right? But he didn't have any power to make laws up for a while. Now, for a while, he arranged to be elected consul every year, but that went against tradition. So, you know, he was kind of like, to be elected consul every year, it denied other Roman aristocrats the ability to become consuls. And it was kind of questionable because it went against tradition. So he found a way of working with the Senate, he found a way to get around that. In 23 BC, the Roman Senate gave him the power of a tribune. He wasn't a tribune, but they gave him the power of a tribune. Now, what did that mean? As a power of a tribune, that gave him the power to sit in the Senate. He now could sit in the Senate as a tribune, with the power of a tribune. And he also could veto anything done by the Roman state. He could veto any court. He could veto the Senate. He could veto anything because he had the power of a tribune. It also gave him the authority to meet with the plebeian assembly and to introduce laws to be made into law. So by having the power of a tribune, now he could sit in the Senate, veto the government, and also introduce legislation, which would invariably get passed. Whatever, usually people did what he was told. So he, by being the proconsul and having the power of a tribune, these two Republican powers, traditional Republican power, gave him absolute power over the Roman government. Now, actually, the whole story of how he did this inspired our founding fathers, because our founding fathers, when they saw that all the power that was amassed in the hands of one man, one reason why people like James Madison came up with this idea of a separation of powers, maybe you've heard that phrase, separation of powers. They saw that if you give too much power to one person, you're going to have problems. You're going to have a dictatorship like you did with Augustus Caesar and his successor. So anyway, but Augustus Caesar was now ruled Rome, and he had Republican powers to rule in a legitimate manner. So the Republic was restored to a certain degree, but the real power was in the hands of Augustus Caesar. And the base of his power was the fact that he commanded the loyalty of Rome's legions.
Yeah, I had read that the name Augustus also meant lofty. I mean, is that
Yeah, it means lofty.
He's elevated like God.
Yeah, exactly. Now when Julius Caesar, Octavian Caesar, now let's just call him Augustus. Now what Augustus did was to put into place some very important policies that really restored order and peace and stability to Rome. That's why you can talk about Augustus as being the architect of the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, that gave Rome peace and his empire peace and stability for 2 centuries. One of the things he did was that he resolved the problem of all the poor in Rome. You had, when he was first ruler, you had something like 600,000 soldiers who were landless and expected land as a reward for their loyal service to the Roman state. And he gave them land. One of the first things he did was to distribute all this land to Rome's soldiers. He reduced the size of the army from about 600,000 to about 200,000 men. And he gave all this land to his veterans. Now, to give this land to his veterans, he had to he had to take away a lot of land from a lot of Italians. But he didn't want to anger anybody, so what he did was to compensate these Italians by giving them land all over the Roman Empire, mainly in what was Gaul and in Spain and in North Africa, but mainly in Spain and in Gaul. So during the reign of Augustus, thousands upon thousands of Italians speaking Latin, which was their native tongue, which was their adopted tongue by this time, these Latin-speaking Italians established themselves in colonies all over Spain and Gaul. Now this is important because this huge transplant, all these transplants, this had the effect of bringing Latin to the Celtic peoples of Spain and Gaul. And eventually, over the centuries, Latin would replace the native languages spoken in these areas, and that's why Spanish and French go back to ancient Latin. So by this process of transplanting all these thousands of Italian colonists into Gaul and Spain, that had the effect of bringing Roman culture to these Celtic areas. Now, another thing he did was that he wanted the Spanish and the Gauls who lived in these areas to adopt the Roman culture. He wanted to Romanize them. So he established a policy where if these native peoples in Spain and Gaul adopted the Roman system of government, if they organized towns, a municipium sounds like municipal, that's where we get the word municipal, but if they established towns that were based on Roman law, then automatically any officials elected to office in those towns would automatically get Roman citizenship, which came with a lot of perks. So the result of this policy was that many native Spanish and native Gauls adopted the Roman system of government and Roman laws so they could get Roman citizenship. And this played a huge role in bringing Roman civilization to these areas and bringing the Latin language, because when they adopted Roman law and the Roman system of government, they tended to learn to speak Latin instead of their native Celtic languages. So that helped to Romanize the area. Also, there was a policy that if you were a native and you served for 25 years in the Roman army, you would automatically be given Roman citizenship for you and your descendants. So they recruited a lot of Spanish and recruited a lot of Gauls to be in the Roman army, and then when their term of service was over, they automatically gained Roman citizenship. So the result of all this was that over the years, as a result of the policies of Augustus, over the years you had people in Spain and in Gaul, future France, adopting Roman civilization. At least the elites did. Maybe not so much in the countryside and rural areas, but in the cities they adopted Roman civilization. So that's what we mean by Romanization. So you could say that French and Spanish culture really go back to the policies of Augustus in Romanizing these areas. Question?
So what was the language there before?
Well, they spoke probably a variety of what we call Celtic languages. Celtic only survives in Old Irish and Cornish, which is spoken in extreme western England.
Isn't there like another little area like on the border of France and Spain that has I forget the name.
There is a language called Romanche, which is
Yeah.
Latin. It's a Latin language and is still spoken in Switzerland, but it's the closest. It's like based on Old Latin. Now, so Augustus had the result was that by giving land to all these landless people and rewarding his soldiers, one of the kind of after effects of that was that it helped to Romanize large areas of the Western Roman Empire, what was Spain and Gaul. Now, another thing that he had to deal with was how do you deal with the proletariat in Rome? You know, Rome had always had a problem with this proletariat, and he had an answer to that too. Give them jobs. Talk about stimulus. This guy did stimulus all over the place. He used all the money, not all the money, but huge sums of money from Egypt that he conquered to have all these big building projects. He even once boasted that he found Rome a city of brick and he left it a city of marble, because he built theaters, aqueducts, temples, roads. I mean, he was theaters. He was building, and this created lots of jobs for the proletariat, and they loved him for it. And he also wined and dined them. It became the policy that the only person who could have gladiatorial combats was the emperor himself. Nobody else could. So when everybody went and got the bread in the circuses, when they went and saw the gladiatorial combats, when they got the free bread from the Roman state, it was all thanks, courtesy of the emperor, courtesy of Augustus. So that built a lot of loyalty among the masses, because they were guaranteed jobs, they were guaranteed bread, they were guaranteed free entertainment, all courtesy of the emperor. Now, he had kind of a carrot and stick approach. You've heard of the carrot and stick approach. The carrot, of course, was the free bread, the circuses, the free job, not free jobs, but all these jobs. That was the carrot. But he had a stick, too. He created a police force for Rome. He also created a fire department for Rome, but he created, it's called the Praetorian Guard. And these were the best troops in the Roman army, the most loyal troops to the emperor. And these troops were stationed in Rome, and it was their job to keep the peace. So if some proletariat got out of hand, maybe were a little too demanding or rioted, he had the Praetorian Guard there to keep order. So this carrot and stick approach kind of kept the proletariat, kept the masses in Rome at bay, and established Augustus as the dominant political force. You know, when he acted in the power as a tribune to have the plebeian assembly meet, I mean, they were going to vote his way because he was the one paying for everything. You're not going to go against the guy paying for the party, right? So he's paying for the bread, the circuses, and so when he wanted to have a meeting of the plebeian assembly, the people were going to go vote the way he told them to vote. Now, another thing he had to deal with was, how about all these wealthy Romans who had been unhappy for years, right? These wealthy Romans who wanted power, but to match their wealth. Well, Augustus found a way to help them too. See, the way he did it was to give them jobs. So he would go to wealthy Romans and say, look, I want to make you an official in my government. And like, for example, the prefect of the Praetorian Guard always was an equestrian, a wealthy non-noble. And he also said, I need a prefect to govern in my name as the governor of Egypt. He only wanted to appoint the most loyal guy. So wealthy Romans who aspired to political power, thanks to the emperor, they could get a job as a prefect of the Praetorian Guard, or as a prefect of Egypt, or he would make them a legate. A legate would be his imperial representative. For example, in the Bible, Pontius Pilate, he wasn't a legate, but he was an official. He was an equestrian who was an official appointed by the emperor to be the emperor's representative in Judea. So Pontius Pilate in the New Testament, the guy who washed his hands of Jesus' blood, he was an official of the Roman Empire, one of these equestrians who was being promoted by the emperor to win political points among the wealthy Romans. Now, what Augustus also did was that he offered the opportunity for these wealthy Romans not only to be legates and officials and hold high positions, but the final reward for them was to enroll them in the Senate itself. He would give them a job in the Senate, which would make them aristocrats. So what he offered the Roman equestrians was a road to becoming nobility, to becoming blue bloods themselves. And so he gave them hope of political success, and he fired their ambitions. And this was very good for Rome in the long run, because these guys who he appointed, when they became governors of provinces, usually wanted to do a good job, because if they did a good job, that would mean they would be promoted and maybe become senators. So that meant that instead of being corrupt and accepting bribes and screwing over the local population by being awful, they would not do that, because if they did a good job, and they would be rewarded by the emperor with a higher position. So that had the effect of benefiting the provincials, because now they could have better government. Instead of being ruled by corrupt Roman officials who were grasping and seizing everything they could, they were ruled by people who were largely more honest. Not so much because they were good people, but because if they did a good job in the provinces as a legate or as a prefect, that would mean a promotion at the hands of the emperor. So these policies that Caesar did, these policies of what Augustus Caesar did, had the effect of kind of ending a lot of the problems that Rome had suffered under for the last 2 centuries during the time of the Roman Revolution, and restored a lot of order and peace and prosperity to the Roman Empire. And once there was internal peace within the empire, when you had all this large area of area that was united by a single government, that did a lot to promote trade and really build up the economy of the entire region. And that would be another source of prosperity and order and success for the Roman Empire over the next 2 centuries. So that's how Augustus Caesar became the architect of the Pax Romana, and of establishing a system of order that would give Rome and the Roman Empire peace and prosperity. All right, we're going to take a little break, but this is what I want you to do. We've just talked about what Augustus did. Well, now you can take a break, of course, and stretch and all that stuff. But what I want you to do in your groups is to kind of just kind of as a way of getting this information in, identify what were the problems that Rome suffered under the Roman Revolution, and how did Augustus deal with those problems? What did he do as emperor to resolve those problems and give Rome some peace and some prosperity? So that's what I want you to think about for the next 5 to 7 minutes while you take your little break here, and then we'll talk about the Pax Romana next. All right. So Augustus, during his reign, he was able to address a lot of these issues, establish a stable Roman state, and for that reason, he was called the author of the Pax Romana. But see, the Principate, the system of government that Augustus created, wasn't perfect. No system of government is. And the biggest problem with the Principate was that there was no succession. See, the emperor was emperor by basis of being voted powers by the Senate. There was no position of emperor. It was only, the emperor was somebody who held multiple powers within the Roman Republic. So one of the problems was, with this system was, if there was ever a situation where there wasn't a clear successor, then the military was left with the job of appointing the new emperor. And that's when the whole Republican facade was unmasked and revealed as military dictatorship, when the army had to assert itself to make one of their own the next emperor. Another problem with the system was that hereditary succession that's what Augustus went with. It didn't always work well, because you can have, the most powerful man in the world is based on, because you're related to somebody, you can get a real loser in there, and that happened. Now, what Augustus did is, before he died, he had a stepson named Tiberius, and he arranged with the Senate so that when he died, Tiberius already was granted the powers of being the proconsul and have the power of a tribune before Augustus died. So when Augustus died in 14 AD, Tiberius was already in control and had all the powers that he needed to govern. And and that's why Augustus started what's called the Julio-Claudian dynasty, because basically the house of Caesar, of the Julius clan and the Claudian clan, these old Republican families, they were the first emperors of Rome. So you had like a hereditary succession. So Tiberius was of the Claudian family. He was the stepson of Octavian, and he ruled as a successful emperor. He had a successful career as a general before he became emperor. Now, he wasn't as popular as his stepfather, and he had to use a Praetorian Guard to eliminate many of his enemies. So he showed a lot of the traits of a tyrant, ruling with an iron fist when he needed to. Now, when he died, though, he had arranged for his own, it was actually his great nephew, Caligula, to be the next emperor.
Well, he was a great guy.
Now, Caligula was nuts. That's the problem with hereditary succession. He was the most powerful man in the world, but he was nuts. He ordered that his favorite racehorse become consul of Rome. And he forced the wives of senators to be prostitutes. Forced the wives of senators to be prostitutes. He turned the imperial palace into a big house of prostitution. And he had slaves come in and pay cash to have sex with senators' wives. I mean, he was just nuts. Now, finally, the Praetorian Guard said, this guy's crazy, and he was murdered by the Praetorian Guard. The leader of the Praetorian Guard ordered his execution. He was killed. Now, at this point, what happened was that Caligula had an uncle who everybody thought was crazy, so he hadn't been executed yet. And Claudius became the new emperor, thanks to, he was raised up by the Praetorian Guard to be the next emperor. Because the Praetorian Guard realized that if there wasn't an emperor, they would all be out of a job. So as soon as they killed Caligula, the Praetorian Guard elevated Claudius to be the next emperor, and the Senate, they had nothing, they had no say in it. They basically said, okay, we grant power to him, because now it was the military forcing the situation. Now, Claudius turned out to be a pretty good emperor after all. He conquered Great Britain. He expanded the empire. Britain was added to the empire during the reign of Claudius. So Claudius was a successful emperor. Now, when he died, power was he gave the power, or his successor was his stepson and also his nephew, Nero. Now, Nero turned out to be another crazy guy. Nero was crazy like Caligula, and that was a problem. He ordered a lot of the people to be executed. He fancied himself this great athlete, and he ordered that all the great athletic festivals be held in the same year so he could win them all at the same time. I mean, nobody's going to lose to the emperor. So he, like, when he was in a chariot race, everybody would be like backing up so he would win, you know. And he thought he was this great musician, so he'd go to all these performances and sing, and everybody would, oh, you're the greatest. You win all the awards. You know, it'd be like if Obama won the Oscar, the Grammy, and the Tonys all in the same year, just because everybody wanted to please him. That's how like it was with, you know, everywhere he went. Oh, you're the greatest, you know. And if you didn't like it, he'd have you killed. He had one guy. He had a group of generals killed because they fell asleep during one of his performances. He had them executed. You know? And the only guy who survived, the only reason he survived is because he was sitting in the back, and people could tell he wasn't asleep because he rested his head against the wall. So he wasn't killed. Now that guy ended up being an emperor someday, so it's kind of funny, isn't it? But anyway, now Nero, eventually the army rose up against Nero because he was nuts. And in 68, what happened was that once the army rose up against Nero, the Senate, who hated him, declared him an outlaw, and Nero ended up committing suicide. Now, this great story is about Nero is that he killed his wife. He kicked her to death because she was late from the races. So he kicked his wife to death. Then he found a man who looked like his wife, and he married him. You don't see like Nero being espoused as a model for gay marriage, but he did have a gay marriage. He married his boyfriend who looked like his wife that he had killed, and then his boyfriend ended up killing. Nero was too afraid to commit suicide, so he asked his boyfriend/wife to kill him for him. So his boyfriend did him in. But anyway, so that's Nero.
Well, now, did he really kill Roman Burns?
He did. The legend was when the city caught on fire, he sang a song because it reminded him of the burning of Troy. So he was inspired. But anyway, he was kind of crazy. Now what happened was, 68, 69 is called the Year of the Four Emperors because when Nero was gone, every army in Rome declared their own general to be the next emperor, right? So and you had a civil war go into effect. Now, it's called the Year of the Four Emperors because it's a year of civil war. Now, thankfully for Rome, this civil war was short. And a man by the name of Vespasian ended up winning the day. Now, Vespasian was the commander of the Roman army crushing the revolt of the Jews. There was a big revolt of the Jews that was going on, and he was in charge of putting down this rebellion. So he had an army under his command, and this is a true story. One reason why he was successful is because there was a prophecy that out of Judea would become a king who would rule the world. And Vespasian said, there's this Jewish prophecy that whoever rules Judea will become the ruler of the world. So I am that prophecy becoming true. I am the Christ. And that's what Vespasian told everybody anyway. And it worked for him. It helped him win some support. But he had an army under his command, and he defeated his enemies, and he became emperor and ruler of the Roman Empire. He was the guy who didn't fall asleep, or we acted like he wasn't asleep. Remember when Nero killed all the other generals? He was the guy who had his head rested against the wall and didn't get killed. But Vespasian became emperor, and he tried to. The same thing happened with him. He tried to make his sons his successors, and one of his successors was his younger son Domitian. You can see his dates up there, 81 to 96 AD. Now Domitian wasn't a bad man, but he was a tyrant. He used the Praetorian Guard to eliminate enemies. And finally, the senators had enough. And the senators rose up, and they found that Domitian's own wife hated him. So, working with Domitian's household and his wife, the Senate arranged for Domitian to be assassinated. So Domitian died in 96 AD. Now, at this point, what happened was that the Roman Senate decided to take take matters into their own hands, and the senators elected a man named Nerva. Now, Nerva was like pushing 70, and he had no children. So they figured, hey, this guy is not going to try to push one of his sons to be the next emperor. So they figured he was a good choice for emperor. So Nerva became emperor. Now, what Nerva did was pretty smart. Nerva adopted as his son a man by the name of Trajan. Now, Trajan commanded the largest of all of Rome's armies. He commanded the Roman army in Germany, in the north. So he had the command of the biggest army and the support of the troops. So Nerva adopted as his son and successor Trajan, who had a great record, a great track record as a general, successful administrator. And so when Nerva died, there was a smooth succession. Now, what happened next is that you had a situation, it was all by chance, that the next 4 emperors, Nerva and the next 4 of his successors, had no children of their own. And so before they died, they would basically arrange for usually a relative or somebody they were related to by marriage who had great success, who had a good track record to be the next emperor. So you had a smooth succession. And Nerva and the next 4 emperors are called the 5 good emperors. And the last of them was Marcus Aurelius, who was considered one of the best emperors of all Roman history. And so this really marked a high point in the Roman Empire, but it was all by chance. It was just by chance in the sense that none of these guys, except for the last one, Marcus Aurelius, had a son of their own. And they arranged for a good administrator who had the support of the Senate to be their successor. And that's why the Principate worked during that 2nd century flat stretch of period. All right, well, what would happen next, though, was eventually the good luck would fall to an end. Marcus Aurelius would have a son, and that would begin the road to ruin and the end of the Principate. And we're going to have to get to that on Wednesday. We're going to talk about the fall of Rome, dominate the fall of Rome, start talking about India. We're going to do that on Wednesday.